Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Neil Herbert, who's the chairman of Pulsar Helium, a leading primary helium exploration and development company listed in Canada and the UK, with its flagship Topaz Project in Minnesota in the US, which is one of the world's highest concentration of helium in the world. Neil brings over 30 years leading and advising companies from startup through to IPOs, development, and over $3 billion of M&A activity. He's an investor and also a leading executive in the growing natural resources companies that he worked within. And he's here today to discuss obviously one of his current projects, Pulsar Helium, and the history behind the company, the project and where they're at the moment, uses of helium, and how the US federal government policy can affect the company, plus much more. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Hawcroft, who are leaders in property risk management in the mining industry since 1992. They offer insurance risk surveys, construction risk reviews, and asset criticality assessments, and more. They work across 600 sites globally and support all areas of mining and mineral extraction. So if you're looking for any property and insurance risk management services, then please visit their website at www.hawcroft.com, and all the details are in the show notes. Neil, welcome back to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm very well, Rob. Nice to be here again.
Yeah, thank you. And when we spoke before, you were working for you're still working for one of your other companies that you're involved in, Atlantic Lithium. But obviously we are speaking about Pulsar Helium. So before we start speaking about the company, I just wondered if you can give a little bit of an overview of yourself and your career to sort of present day.
Okay. Thanks very much, Rob. So yeah, I started my career in the 90s. I originally trained as an accountant with PwC, but I joined Antofagasta when it was a relatively small company, and we built a very big mine called Los Pelambres, which then was about $1.5 billion of Capex, and it changed the company from when I joined it, which was 137 million sterling Capex, to what it is today, which I think is around 20 billion. So been a fantastic project for the company, and indeed, the company's gone on to do much bigger things. I moved on and I was CFO of a company called Branco Holdings, which was one of the first really big AIM listing success stories in London, which was sold for $368 million in 2002. They worked with a number of other projects, most notably Euromin, which was a project I came in as part of the investment group. And I ended up being finance director and listing it in London, and then listing it in Canada on the main board. And we took it from a valuation of 20 million, raised over $250 million, and sold it for $2.5 billion about 2.5 years later. It was one of those perfect storms, as it were. They don't come around that often, but when they come, you take advantage of them. I then ran another investment company, which was called Polo Resources. We were very successful in the energy sector, most notably in uranium again, but also in oil and gas and coal. And more recently, I've been doing my own projects, if you like. So beyond being the chairman of Atlantic Lithium, which I've now been involved with for over a decade in one or other roles, this came up, helium came up about 10 years ago. And so the interest in helium from my side was very high value product. So if you were to make the comparison with the project that we have against if it was a gold project, which obviously a lot of your listeners will understand, and when you get 5 grams per ton, you're thinking you're doing really well. In terms of value here, this has the potential to be basically 5 kilograms of gold per ton. So it's a phenomenal return potentially on these projects because it's a very high value stream. The value of helium is around 100 times that of natural gas. So very significant. Started working in Africa, looking at projects. But when this project came up in the States, it was how can I say, it was just a no-brainer. It was a project that was so good you couldn't miss it. And so we started working on this project some years ago. And so it's a very exciting story because of the very high concentrations of helium gas and also the lack of association with hydrocarbons, which just makes the project much more straightforward. And indeed, in terms of a value proposition, even more tempting.
Before we start speaking about the company, I suppose wondered if you can inform or tell the audience what actually helium's used for.
Sure.
And obviously there's probably many uses. So I just want to just tell us a little bit about, what helium's actually used for.
So it's used in a wide range of technological applications, and obviously as technology advances, more helium is used. So the growth rate for helium is quite considerable, and the only thing really been holding you back has been supply problems, which has had consistency over the last 15 years, mainly because there are too few sources of supply. So we're talking about 2 or 3 main sources of supply, which are also primarily hydrocarbon associated. So it's a byproduct. So anyway, the principal use as it stands today, the most important one right now is in microprocessor production. So you're looking at a growth in that sector of about 20% per annum. It uses helium in the production of those, the microchips effectively that go into everything now. And very important to the future of everything to do with technology across the board, whether it be for personal use, defense, otherwise, other uses. Probably the second most important use is in healthcare. It's used in MRI scanners. It's used in breathing gases as well. So again, it's a very important gas for the healthcare sector. And obviously, as we have aging populations, everybody wants to have access to good healthcare. So again, an important application. And while there's a number of new applications, the one that I'll highlight is actually it's used in propulsion systems. So everything to do with space exploration and anything to do with rocket usage is actually very important to the helium usage. So again, that's growing at around 20% per annum currently. So these are a rapidly expanding market for the gas and very limited sources of supply.
So just wondering if you can just give us a overview and I suppose the history to Pulsar Helium.
So in terms of where we started and where we are, as I said, we started looking at projects in Africa. I and the CEO, Tom Abraham James, who's a geologist who was a pioneer in helium gas exploration. When this opportunity came up, it was so compelling that we effectively switched horses and started working in the United States on this project. It was actually an accidental discovery in 2011. So you'll like the story, Rob. Some geologists were out doing exploration for a nickel company. And as sometimes happens in our business, they were doing a well, and suddenly gas shot out of the well at very high pressure, and everyone runs away from the well because normally it's methane. And normally these things, they effectively wind down very quickly. So a day or two, the gas disappears and you can start working again. But in this case, that didn't happen. The pressure was maintained. They couldn't work out what was happening, so they actually took samples of the gas and then managed to plug the hole. But the gas concentrations when it came back from the labs showed very high helium concentrations and no hydrocarbon association. So something almost unique, unusual, very high concentrations, not something that you see in other projects out there. So that's very important to us. So we obtained the rights to the project a few years ago, and we started doing wells. So we've done 2 wells so far. Good pressure in those wells, very high concentrations, as I say, no hydrocarbon associations, lots of tick boxes for us in terms of the project. And so now we're at the stage of doing flow testing work on the project, but we need to do a cleanup of the wells effectively. So there's quite a lot of fine material in the wells, which is blocking up the system. So we're going in to use a combination of fluids and gases to clean that up. And as we're putting it down the well, we do require a permit for that. So we have to be a little bit patient while that happens. But in terms of our timeline, assuming that those tests go well, we will move on to FID quite quickly. So in differentiation to something you'd see in a hard rock project, once you actually understand what your flow of gas is and how reliable that flow of gas is, obviously you can move to production quite quickly. So we could actually find ourselves achieving FID earlier next year.
Regarding obviously the Topaz project in Minnesota, which is obviously your flagship project, how advanced are you towards production, and is the project achievable from a financial investment decision?
So it's a good question. assuming we get a tick for the remaining boxes that we have, obviously we already have very high concentrations. We know that it flows. We've actually done 2 wells that could be converted to production, so they're fully amenable to taking to the next step. The reality is if all of that goes well with the remaining testing this year, we get to FID early next year. Now, from then on, in terms of taking the project to production, obviously there's some permitting hurdles we have to go through, and we need the plant to be put together for us. Unlike a lot of mineral projects, the plant is remarkably small, so we're looking at a relatively small footprint. And so permitting, relatively straightforward, and obviously we don't have any toxic or inflammable gases involved, so again, that makes it streamlines the process from a regulatory point of view. And the plant itself is effectively something that is built somewhere else. In fact, we're planning to have it done by a specialist industrial gas company in Minnesota. So that should take 12 to 18 months to put together. So you could actually be in production the year after next.
The obviously project is described as a primary helium project, where most helium is produced obviously as a byproduct of natural gas. What's the importance of that to project viability and future development?
Again, a good question. So the reality is what's happened to the market in the last 15 years and the instability of supply that I've referred to is that the US government had a massive strategic reserve of helium for its own purposes, for its space program, its defense program. However, about 25 years ago, they decided that it was no longer appropriate for them to hold that reserve. So they started selling it down. That reserve is now exhausted and those sales of helium have ceased. What's happened is that the instability arises is that you've got a couple of sources of supply where it's effectively a byproduct production. So that's a fixed amount of supply. And obviously what's not driving the project is the helium price, because if you look at, for example, one of the biggest producers in the world is Qatar. Qatar has a natural gas stream. Effectively, it's extracting a 0.03 or 4% content of helium compared to our 14% helium from that stream. And so there have been a lot of problems with that because transportation is difficult, because they shut down the project because they need to renovate their equipment, etc. They've had geopolitical considerations in terms of actually being able to ship at times. All of these things have impacted supply. So actually having a supply which is purely driven by helium demand is important, and having it in the United States is probably more important than ever. The biggest consumer in the world of helium is actually the United States. So they're big producers of microchips. They obviously have a big space program. They have a big healthcare industry. This is the biggest consumer in the world. And given it's difficult to transport because it's subject to a lot of leakage when it's transporting, you can lose a lot of product. The nearer you have it to your end use, the better. So that being a primary project in the heart of the USA is a key advantage to us.
How well served is the project with obviously local infrastructure, and what challenges do you see as a potential project development?
So we're pretty fortunate in terms of the location. We're not far from the local highway network. In fact, we're not that far from a rail hub, although we don't expect to be producing the sort of volumes that would require that, although they're available to us if we wanted to use it. Power is a consideration, although the power requirement is relatively modest, but we are relatively near to the power network as well. So all that sits there, that actually works pretty well from our side. What we really need to provide for is the plant site itself. And so the range of expenditure on that is pretty modest. Rob, I think if you're looking at mining projects, we're looking here at sort of 10 to 50 million of capital expenditure that would be required for the project. So not a great deal of infrastructure to be put in, partly because the volumes of what we produce are relatively small. So it's a very high value, small volume product. And as a result of which, there isn't a great deal of infrastructure that's required.
And what's the importance of the recent agreement signed with the equipment manufacturer Chart Industries? And what role will they have in the project sort of going forward?
So Chart are important to us in several different ways. Obviously, we're primarily being exploration driven. And as we look to go to production, you need that expertise. So Chart Industries are one of the biggest and the most specialist manufacturers of equipment for the industrial gas sector. So everything that we need in terms of the equipment, we can actually go through them. So they've been very excited about the project, and there are two reasons for that. One is that they are a Minnesota-based company, so they actually produce all this equipment down the road from us, a couple of hours away, which is great for the local economy. But equally importantly, because this is a good add-on to their existing business, so that they also provide things for helium and CO2, which is our primary byproduct, already for their clients. They can provide all that to us. They can run all these scenarios in terms of our feasibility study that we'll need to do at the end of this year, assuming everything's going well. So they provide a degree of technology knowledge and indeed all the equipment itself to provide for the project. And obviously in a time when there's a great deal of disturbance to international economies due to tariffs and other restrictions, it's great to have local supply available to us.
And what is the scale of the Capex for the eventual build of the project, and how may this be financed?
So as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at a range of Capex around 10 to 50 million, and that's really just a question of what production scenario that we work to and what we're producing at site. In terms of how to finance that, we already have from University Bank provided us a facility. So that's a $4 million facility, and we're in discussions with them regarding project financing at a larger scale. There are also a number of institutions at a federal level in the US and at the state level in the US who have an interest in seeing this project develop. So we actually may well find that we find additional financing from state and federal government available to us. And the last one is obviously it's a very valuable product, and as I said before, supply has been unreliable to end users, which is a big problem if you're running a manufacturing process and your raw materials don't show up on time. So we also expect potential for there to be a degree of offtake financing as well. So given the relative modest scale of the Capex requirement and indeed the potential funders available to us where we are in the US, I'm not expecting it to be a great deal of problem to raise that money.
Despite both wells completed to date suffering blockages due to presence of obviously drilling fines, pressures were recorded at 122 and 145 psig respectively. Has Pulsar identified its preferred approach to mobilise the drilling fines and relieve the blockages?
So the classic way to relieve these blockages, and it's not an untypical phenomenon in gas wells, is to use basically you're pumping out either fluids or gases or a combination thereof into the well. So talking to the technical team, if you like, they are fine-tuning that at the moment in terms of the combination of the fluid they put into the well and the gas they put into the well. And typically, the gas can be nitrogen, fluid can be water, but also a solution as well, all of which helps dissolve the fines in the well. And so do expect that to come forward in the next month or two. We are subject to permitting. Minnesota's, generally speaking, has been a good state to work in, but obviously they don't have a lot of experience in the gas sector, so everything takes a little bit of time and we need to be patient, but it's all coming together nicely.
The US federal government policy is obviously much in the news currently. How does the federal government policy impact the project? And is it for better or is it for worse?
So we're targeting selling to the US market, which is obviously something which the US government is focused on, is actually ensuring supply of raw materials. And there's been a lot of press about this in the sector in general. So we know that the federal government is targeting this project as a project that it would like to see come to completion and accelerate. So that's helpful for us in terms of everything that we do. I would say the federal government recently, and we've seen this, we saw uranium projects basically being fast-tracked to permitting recently, have actually come to fruition, which is quite impressive how quickly that has been done. So I take that as a good thing. We are planning to sell to the US market, so we're not planning to export. If you look at the balance of supply and demand into the US helium market, there's been increasing imports into the US, and we know that the US would rather have local supply available to it so it captures its own supply chain. So we think we're consistent with that. Tariffs, well, I think the main fear for tariffs, and if you're building a new project at the moment in the US, is can you get the necessary equipment? In our case, fortunately, all the equipment is actually produced in the US, and we come back to the agreement we did with Chart Industries, which is obviously very important to us. So to be frank, I think we're net winners from federal policy at the moment, and hope that long may that continue, Rob.
Given Pulsar's goal of selling gas directly to large end users, what kind of offtake discussions and strategic partnerships are you exploring?
So we've been approached by different partners over the years. So everything from SpaceX to those who use it in the medical industry. For the helium gas, one of the interesting things that I found, which we didn't give a lot of thought to when we originally put the project together, is that the primary byproduct for us is actually CO2. And CO2 currently is trading at about 6 times. It's nowhere near as valuable as helium, but still 6 times the value of a hydrocarbon gas, which is quite impressive in itself. So there's been a bit of a shortage in the US for that. So actually, people have really been banging on our doors. So finding a pure source of CO2 is apparently a bit of a problem, and particularly in Minnesota. So there's very keen interest in that as well as the helium. So a lot of potential use within the state. Microchip production, for example, goes on in the state in southern Minnesota. So there's a lot of local demand for what we have as well as nationwide in the US. So I don't think we'll have any problem finding takers for our product.
Minnesota has a long history of mining, but no history of gas extraction. What challenges has that presented to the project?
So you're absolutely right. When we first started the project, one of the issues was as we were looking to increase our land position, was actually there was no provision in law for gas exploration at all. But again, the reason for that being Minnesota doesn't have any hydrocarbons potential, so it never had any need to have any relevant legislation. So as we came forward with the project, I was very impressed actually from the reaction from the political community about facilitating development in the future. So they actually brought in new legislation last year, which they're now bedding down, which actually sets out how it's basically providing the format and the way that we can take this project to production. And so importantly for us, that also gives us the opportunity to expand our land position. So we currently have we've been expanding it through private mineral rights in the US, which is different from state rights from what we normally see elsewhere we operate in the world. So we have about 6,000 acres to date, but we would imagine with the state lands that we will eventually come through this process of this new legislation. We'll probably look at about a 10-time increase in our land position across what we see as being the helium field, and allowing us to expand our operations significantly. So one of the things we're looking at that is how can we effectively exploit that? So far, we've been doing production wells, which are not enormously expensive, but still $2 to $3 million to do. Can we look at covering that ground a lot more effectively and cheaply to actually understand the potential growth in the size of resources and the mineral reserves could be staggering compared to where we are today. So I do think it's a big opportunity now that the state has sorted out its legislation. And as I say, across the board from the local communities, the local indigenous communities, and indeed at the federal level, both sides of the House, Democrats and Republicans, enormous support for the project. So I'm quite excited actually from where we've got to with the Minnesota state.
You're involved in a lithium project and obviously now in a helium project. What would you say the main differences are between mining and gas from your experience managing and trying to develop a project to get it off the ground? And I suppose, is there anything the mining industry can learn from what the gas industry is doing?
Oh, that's a very challenging question. So in terms of the differences, it is very different in terms of the path to development. So, I mean, if you look at the mining industry, we do some work, we get some good results from our exploration program, we do some more exploration, we build it up. We then create some resources, and when over time we look to take those up to reserves by doing more work, and we do feasibilities studies. And in the case of most mining activity, obviously permitting is a big hurdle because you're normally making a big hole in the ground and putting in a plant, and it's quite sizable. So those processes tend to take years to pull together. The difference with this business, and I had to be more specific to say, particularly this business, because obviously normal hydrocarbons projects themselves are enormous scale and take years to build and develop, is because the footprint of the project is so small that you don't need a great deal of infrastructure. So permitting is unlikely to be a big hurdle for the project and relatively timely in terms of being able to move it forward. The other side to it is that it's much more instantaneous in a way. So once actually you get a good flow of gas, you've got a good flow of gas, you know. So sure, you've got to do the work on it, but that takes a relatively small amount of time. And the feasibility study, which is normally an enormous undertaking for a mine, for a gas extraction, to be frank, is a lot more straightforward. And doesn't really take that much time. Hence, you're looking at, you know, a timeline here is everything goes well, production in 2 years is a very feasible thing to achieve. Whereas for mining, from the point where I might be today, which probably take me 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 years to get to that point in time. So yes, it is a very different business in one way. Can we learn anything from each other? Well, we always try and learn things from each other. One of the things I think that we've been very interesting, which is as much for the hard rock and for gas exploration, has actually been passive seismic. So these passive seismic units have been a real revolution for us, but we've also used them in lithium exploration as well. And this is a relatively, in fact, it's very inexpensive, but you get a lot of good data and understanding about the geology from that passive seismic work compared to doing conventional seismic work. So I think extremely cost-effective tool. But you're always trying to learn from what you do. And I think one of the things that we were pioneers with Tom and I was looking at using effectively smaller rigs, because we don't have the same issue with a non-explosive gas that you would have with a. So normally, if you're drilling for gas, you want to have a rig that can deal with all circumstances, and obviously a flammable gas. If you don't have a flammable gas, you can actually look at doing things on a on a smaller scale and a lower cost basis, which is also very interesting. So yes, we do learn things from one side of the business to the other, but fundamentally, I think the timelines to production are much quicker, potentially, Rob, with a good gas project.
I was going to say, I wouldn't want to put you under pressure by asking which kind of projects you would prefer in mining or gas. But obviously, I suppose they do present their challenges, but it seems one's quicker to production than the other. But is there a preference to what you've experienced?
Well, you know, I started my career in hard rock mining, so it is the thing that's most familiar to me. So I have a slight preference, but I guess because I come from a financial discipline rather than a geologist or an engineer, I kind of look at them all as commodities and how you can actually, you know, turn those into a business. So ultimately, in a way, it's all the same to me because it's a unit, Rob, and I'm trying to work out how I make those units into a business. But I would say that the more familiar to me remains to be hard rock mining. But you know, it's great to be able to do different things through your career and experience the nuances of working with different commodities and the business. And obviously, you know, hard rock mining as such as covers all sins. They can be very different businesses with themselves. So the markets are different, the extraction is different, the processing is different. Lithium to gold and gold to extracting iron ore. I mean, these are very different businesses as well. So,
and lastly, what's the short to medium term outlook for Pulsar Helium?
So, what I would really like to see is obviously completion of the current testing program, which really sets us up for a financial investment decision. All well, if not, we may need to do some more work. So certainly, you know, if we don't get the result at the moment, well, maybe we need to do some more drilling. As I say, we're looking at how we can do that in a really cost-effective way if we have to, but those scenarios are all being built out. If the FID is on time, then we'll be looking next year effectively to enter into offtake agreements and complete the financing. Obviously, we've had great support from University Bank already, providing us debt facility. Given the relative modest amounts of money involved and the relatively quick payback on it, which is we expect under a year, Don't expect enormous problems with that. And in which case, assuming the permitting as well, which should be straightforward given the small footprint, 27 should be a year for production. On a small scale production, we may even be able to achieve that in 26 if the stars align, Rob. So let's see.
Yeah. Well, good luck with everything, and I appreciate coming on and just, I suppose, changing the subject slightly from mining to gas. Although obviously your background is in mining. So if our audience wants to reach out to you, if they've got any questions, how can they go about doing that, and what social media channels are you advertising the project on?
So we actually got pretty coverage against most of the social media. So I think you'll find us on Twitter and probably other things as well, but certainly on LinkedIn. We're out there. Very happy for you to contact me if you'd like to talk about Pulsar and what we're doing. Do think it's a very unique project. I mean, there are other helium projects out there, but I think the characteristics of this one are, as I say, particularly compelling. But always happy to be reached out to. Probably the best to contact me on LinkedIn if you'd like to discuss the project.
Yeah, no worries. And I appreciate your time, and good luck for the remainder of this year, going into next year, and hopefully project moves forward and get to production earlier, later next year than rather than 2027.
Thank you, Rob. Much appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Just slightly different. We've just went into a little bit of the gas side, but obviously Neil is from the mining background, and I wanted to get him on the podcast to just tell us about the project that he's involved in, and see what differences in what he's doing now in terms of a project execution, and how different it is from mining. And obviously Neil has alluded to that. So thank you for listening. Please keep sharing these episodes far and wide. And until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.